Today's scripture comes from 1 Corinthians 1:10 through 17. Now I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you be in agreement, and that there be no division among you, but that you be united in the same mind and the same purpose. For it has been reported to me by Chloe, people, that there are quarrels among you, my brothers and sisters. What I mean is that each of you says, I belong to Paul, or I belong to Apollos, or I belong to Cephas, or I belong to Christ. Has Christ been divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? I thank God that I have baptized none of you except Cephas and Gaius, so that no one can say that you were baptized in my name. I did baptize also the household of Stephanas. Beyond that, I do not know whether I baptized anyone else. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to proclaim the gospel, and not with eloquent wisdom, so that the cross of Christ might not be emptied of its power. May God add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and understanding of the scriptures. Amen.
Would you pray with me? Lord, take my lips and speak through them. And take our ears and open them so we may hear your word for us. And then take our hearts and our lives and fill them with your love. And guide us so we may be faithful servants who are grounded in both your word and your love. Amen. So our passage today comes from Paul's first letter to the church in Corinth. It's a church that he founded on one of his missionary journeys. And as this letter opens up, they were clearly having some issues. A lot of Paul's letters to his churches were addressing issues that were going on in these communities of faith that he had started. And this is the very beginning of the letter. So this is the 10th verse. And so Paul had just gotten done with just his basic kind of greeting that he kind of does. It's his pattern. And he's already into, I've heard that you're quarreling and there's fights and there's divisions among you. It was one of their main issues, that they were not a united body of faith. Now, I want to make a few reminders about the church and also the city of Corinth in particular. Corinth is located in present-day Greece. And if you have that map, Dorman, Corinth is on this land bridge in Greece. And so it was in a very key place. And so I've talked about this before, and I've actually shown this picture before in worship. But it functioned as both a port city and as well as a city that was on this land bridge that connected these major parts of Greece. And so because of that, it was a large city. And it had a lot of different groups of people in the city because of trade and commerce. They had people from all around that area of the world. So it was diverse. And despite this diversity, despite the fact that there is nothing linking different groups of people together like family or ethnicity, Paul attempted to bring together a community of faith into a church that had so much diversity in its backgrounds. He brought rich people and poor people together. He brought slaves and he brought free people together into a church. He brought people who used to be Jewish and now are Jewish Christians, and also Gentiles who worshipped other pagan gods, into the same church. And he did this all in an attempt for them to follow Christ together. But after he had founded that church and brought the group together, he left to start other churches. And he was hearing that they were having problems. The church was divided. They were fighting with one another. And there were factions within the church. There were cliques within the church. And they were each claiming allegiance to different leaders or different people. And so they kind of had their groups and the leaders of those groups, and Paul actually lists them off as he is writing to them, talking about Apollos and Cephas, which is Peter. Now these cliques that were in the church were based on who the people wanted to follow. Paul was the church planter, right? He was the one that started and founded the church, right? He was the church's first leader, so there were people who were devoted to him, right? And they said, well, I'm one of Paul's people, right? Now, Apollos was somebody who followed Paul. He was a younger preacher that followed him, and as Paul moved on planting churches, Apollos was one of the people that Paul brought in place to follow him. And he was a charismatic and young preacher. He was well known for his preaching skills, and because of that, drew more people into the church. And so they were people who liked him. And they claimed allegiance to him because of his skills as a public speaker. And then Paul also mentions Peter, or Cephas, which is Peter's name. And so there were also some that went back to Peter and go, well, Peter was one of the original disciples, right? He was the one whom Christ gave the keys to the kingdom. And so they're even going back before Paul and the founding pastor and going back even further in their devotion, right? So they had all picked who they wanted to follow, and they all had their groups within this church, and it was causing all kinds of arguments and divisions within the church. And Paul, in this letter, in this section of this letter, basically says, has Christ been divided up? Has Christ been chopped up into pieces for each of us to follow, right? Or even says, was I, Paul, crucified for you? Paul is wondering why they are giving their allegiances and following other people rather than following Christ altogether. You know, there are some times when we lose our focus on Christ. There are situations in life, there are things that pop up, and we all at times lose our focus. Now, it doesn't mean we're wandering and lost, but sometimes our focus shifts. And sometimes we're focused on things that don't really matter at all. They're kingdom issues. In my life, I've been a good number of churches. Because my mom's a United Methodist pastor, and I've traveled around, and I was a member of churches in college. I think I counted them up one time, and I think it was 17 or 18 churches. So I think you're the 17th or 18th church that either I've been appointed to and been a pastor of, or have been the pastor kid of, right? Or have been a college kid. You know, and some of the churches that I've been a part of had disagreements. Wouldn't you know? Sometimes churches have disagreements. The church I was at when I was a youth, when I was in high school, basically split because of a building project. We had outgrown the sanctuary, and we had been meeting in the gym, and we were having to set up chairs every single Sunday, and we were growing. And we had 3 services, and we were needing a bigger space. And so we had this building project that was proposed. And there were so many arguments over it, about how are we going to pay for this, about how big do we need it, or why don't we just do another service, that it split the church. And eventually we moved back into the sanctuary, because we couldn't even fill that sanctuary. Another church I've been a part of was arguing about the color of paint in the parlor and the color of the furniture, whether they matched or not. And somebody had donated the couches and the love seats and all of that, and they wanted it to stay. And it became such a heated argument that one time in the dead of night, somebody came in and broke into the church and stole the furniture. Now, in another church, while I wasn't at the church at the time that this happened, had happened just before I was appointed there. But all they could talk about was the missing coffee cart. So somebody had, there was a big fellowship area, and they had a coffee cart that they would pull out so that we could have coffee in this fellowship area, but it was too close to the sanctuary for some people. And just like those couches, sometime in the dead of night, somebody came in and used their key, got into the church, and stole that coffee cart. It too had been removed from church property. So I have seen some things in my life. I have seen some churches argue about things that don't really matter. Having the right kind of couch in the church parlor and having it match the paint is not a kingdom issue. Making sure that you have coffee in a proper distance away and making sure the sanctuary is a coffee-free bubble is not going to help bring anybody to Christ, right? It has nothing to do with Christ's kingdom. And my friends, this isn't how church should be, right? And I'm saying the big capital C church, right? Not just the big capital C church has had its history of disagreements. We have fought over all kinds of things, right? We've had all kinds of different splinterings and splits off, right? About, how do you have to be baptized, right? Or does God predetermine everything or not? Or do we have free will? There's all kinds of things that the church has argued about over the time. Some things, like whether Christ was divine, fully human, and fully God, that was an argument that went on for a while. And that's something that actually is important. But my friends, there are some things that aren't important, that we sometimes argue about. And we get divided up, and we get into smaller and smaller groups. But my friends, we shouldn't be like the Church of Corinth, where we are in a small group in our clique of only like-minded people, right? What Paul was trying to do is being faithful to his call that Christ gave him and bringing people of all different kinds of backgrounds together. And honestly, I think that the big C, big capital church, we need to remember that we've been doing this for far too long. We've been arguing about things that don't really matter instead of working on what we really should be doing. Now, I'm not even going to mention anything about our current disagreements and arguments that are happening in the large United Methodist Church and disaffiliations. But I know from some of my friends who are in the ministry, there are churches that are tearing each other apart right now. And we spent too much time arguing. And it doesn't matter about what we're arguing about, we just spent too much time arguing. And we need to get back to what church is supposed to be. Now, in his letter, Paul is pleading with the church in Corinth. In an earlier translation, Paul is saying, I beseech you, right? He's pleading with them to stop fighting, to stop tearing one another apart, and he prayed that they would both be united in purpose and in the same mind. Now, when Paul says be united in mind, it's not a call to uniformity of like political beliefs or thinking the same thing. There's a different Greek word for meaning that, but what this Greek word meant was that having a common core commitment or belief. So like when we stand up and when we say the Apostles' Creed and say this is what we believe about God, that's what he's kind of talking about. Being of the same mind is being of the same faith, basically. Now, when he also says purpose, he's talking about what we're supposed to be as a church, what it means to be a church. And when we're wasting time arguing over petty things that don't really matter, when we aren't doing that, we can come together in a diversity of backgrounds for one common purpose. For Paul, he gives us what his purpose was. It was to proclaim the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. It wasn't to baptize people in a particular way or by a particular person, but it was proclaiming the gospel. He wanted more people to know that Christ died for them and that God loved them. He wanted to share the good news. Paul wanted people who were different, who had different backgrounds, who were rich and poor, who were slaves and free, who were Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians, all to come together for a common purpose. So in the months and weeks to come, we're going to be talking about what our purpose is as a church. We're actually going to talk a little bit about that today at Church Council. And this is different from our mission, right? So we have a mission statement of the United Methodist Church, which is to make disciples for Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, right? That's what we're supposed to do, right? A mission is what you do. But a purpose is the reason why you exist. So I'm not going to tell you what our purpose is, because that's something we all have to do together, right? And so I want you to start thinking about and dreaming about what's our purpose. Why does University United Methodist Church exist? Why are we here right on the corner of Hampstead and Taft? Right across the street from MSU. Why are we here? We know what we are about, that we are about the business of making disciples for the transformation of the world, but why? What's the end goal? Now, some of those churches that I've talked about that had some of those arguments and disagreements also had some mixed up purposes. And so honest conversations I had with people, they wanted that church to exist until their funeral. And one person actually said, as long as the lights stay on until my funeral is held here, after that I don't care. And my friends, that's sad. This church isn't just a waiting room for heaven. We don't come together and we don't worship and we don't give just to keep the lights on. What's our purpose? I hope it's something very different from that. That it's not a waiting room. I hope we can find our purpose. And so my challenge for you today, I'm not going to wrap up and say these are the things we need to do, right? The only thing I'm going to ask you to do is to be thinking about this. Thinking about what our purpose is as University United Methodist Church. And when we come together to talk about our purpose, to be ready to share your thoughts. So that's my challenge for you, is to leave here and think about why we are here. What's the end goal for having us here? And then a second challenge to you is to be praying for your church. That we might all be united in that purpose that we come up with. So that we can follow Christ, proclaiming the gospel, and living into that future that God has in store for us. So may you be thinking about our purpose, but also pray for us to be united as a church. Amen.